I didn't scream. Not when I found out. Not when his name replaced mine. Not when people congratulated him for something I had bled for. I didn't confront him in front of people. Didn't pull him aside at events. Didn't raise my voice or ask for explanations I already knew the answer to. I didn't post receipts. Didn't hint online. Didn't weaponize public sympathy or try to drag his reputation through the mud. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. When Daniel took my life's work and put his name on it, something inside me didn't break. It sharpened. Most people think revenge starts with anger, yelling, accusations, exposure. They think justice needs an audience. But anger is loud, and loud people make mistakes. I understood something Daniel didn't, something he would only learn too late. Success doesn't forgive ignorance. It demands competence. And Daniel had never built anything from the ground up. He had only watched me do it. So I stayed quiet. I let him believe he had won. Let him believe the hardest part was over. Let him enjoy the applause, the handshakes, and the sudden respect. Because silence makes people careless. When no one is challenging you, you stop double-checking your lies. When no one is watching closely, you start cutting corners. When you think the threat is gone, you expose yourself. And careless people always reveal everything. I watched him step into rooms I used to imagine myself in. Watched him tell my story like it was his own. Watched people nod along, impressed by confidence that wasn't earned. And every time he spoke, he drifted a little further from the truth. He didn't realize that each exaggeration left a trail, that every missing detail created a gap, that every lie needed another lie to support it. He thought silence meant forgiveness, or weakness. He mistook my stillness for defeat. That was his second mistake. The first was stealing my work. The second was assuming I would fight him the way he expected. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I didn't need him to fail quickly. I needed him to fail completely. Because there's a difference between destroying someone and letting them destroy themselves. And Daniel was already doing the work for me. Daniel and I met before either of us had anything to lose. Before ambition came with contracts. Before trust had a price tag. We were young in the way that makes you reckless, convinced the world was wrong for not recognizing you yet. Broke in the way that forces creativity and angry in the quiet, simmering way that never really goes away. The kind of anger that tells you you're meant for more, even when you can't prove it. We shared a cramped apartment that smelled like instant noodles and damp laundry. The furniture didn't match because none of it belonged to us long enough to matter. A couch someone left on the sidewalk. A table that wobbled no matter how many napkins we folded under it. We told ourselves it was temporary. Nights stretched endlessly. We'd sit on the floor, backs against the wall, talking about what we were going to become. Not if we made it. When. Success wasn't a possibility. It was an inevitability we spoke into existence because believing anything else felt like surrender. Daniel talked like the world owed him something. I talked less. Listened more. He had this gravity about him. The kind that pulled attention without effort. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with phone numbers, promises, and vague opportunities that sounded better the longer he talked about them. People leaned in when he spoke, trusted him easily, remembered his name the next day. I noticed different things. How people reacted when they felt pressured. Where conversations lost momentum. Why some promises never turned into action. Daniel loved the spotlight. I studied the stage. He called us brothers. Not jokingly, not casually, with conviction. Blood doesn't mean anything, he used to say. Choice does. And I believed him. Because when you're building something from nothing, loyalty feels sacred. It feels like the only thing you can count on when everything else is unstable. One night, after too many cheap drinks and not enough food, we made a promise. We were sitting on the floor, backs against the couch, staring at a future we could barely afford to imagine. Daniel raised his bottle like it meant something. No matter what happens, he said, his voice heavy with certainty, we don't screw each other over. Ever. I nodded. Success won't change us, he continued. Money won't turn us into those people. Those people, the ones we blame for our lack of progress. The ones we swore we were nothing like. We clinked bottles. I remember feeling like the promise mattered, like it needed to be spoken out loud. I didn't understand why at the time. What neither of us understood was this. Hunger doesn't disappear when you stop being poor. It just changes shape. When you're broke, hunger looks like survival. When you're close to success, hunger looks like desperation. And when success finally shows itself, hunger becomes entitlement. We thought we were bonding over dreams. What we were really doing was revealing who we would become once those dreams were finally within reach. The years that followed didn't look like progress. They looked like waiting. Waiting for emails that never came. Waiting for calls that ended in polite rejection. Waiting for someone, anyone, to see what we believed was obvious. We submitted ideas into systems that didn't care who we were. Every rejection came dressed differently, but the message was always the same. Not yet, not quite, not you. Daniel took it personally. Every rejection felt like disrespect, like an insult the world was throwing directly at him. He paced the apartment after bad calls, ran his hands through his hair, cursed people he'd never meet. They don't get it, he'd say. They are blind. I didn't disagree, but I didn't rage either. I watched patterns form. I noticed which ideas sparked interest before dying quietly, which questions investors asked over and over again, where conversations shifted from curiosity to doubt. Daniel hated the silence. I learned to live inside it. He needed validation, proof that he mattered, that he was special, that the world owed him a turn. I needed understanding. I needed to know why things failed, not just that they did. So while Daniel rehearsed pitches in front of the mirror, perfecting delivery and tone, I dismantled systems. I rebuilt concept from the ground up. I tested assumptions no one wanted to question. At night, after Daniel went to sleep, I stayed awake. Not out of hope, out of stubbornness. I wasn't chasing recognition. I was chasing inevitability. There were moments, small, almost invisible ones, when I noticed Daniel drifting. He started talking about my work as I would work more often than before. He'd answer questions meant for me, finish explanations I hadn't started. At first, it felt natural. We were a team, after all, but something about the way he spoke changed. The way his eyes lingered on reactions. The way he adjusted stories depending on who was listening. He wasn't lying yet. He was rehearsing. Meanwhile, life kept shrinking. Bills stacked up. Friends moved on. People stopped asking what we were working on and started asking if we considered other options. Daniel hated those questions. I absorbed them, because invisibility does something to you. It either makes you desperate, or it makes you precise. I chose precision. I stripped ideas down until nothing unnecessary remained. I studied failures like they were blueprints. I learned how fragile confidence becomes when it's built on performance instead of substance. Daniel grew louder. I grew quieter, and somewhere in those years, without either of us noticing, our hunger stopped being the same. His hunger wanted applause. Mine wanted permanence. We were still standing side by side, but we were no longer walking in the same direction. The idea didn't arrive like inspiration usually does in movies. There was no sudden flash, no bolt of clarity, no moment where everything made sense all at once. It came quietly, almost reluctantly, after months of exhaustion. By then, the nights had started to feel heavier. Not longer, heavier. The kind of nights where silence presses against your ears and your own thoughts feel louder than anything else in the room. Daniel slept early those days. He'd burn himself out pacing, talking, venting, replaying conversations that didn't matter anymore. I stayed awake, not because I was hopeful, because sleep felt like surrender. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as cars passed outside, thinking about everything that didn't work. Every rejection, every stalled conversation, every moment where interest faded just as quickly as it appeared. I stopped asking what people wanted. I started asking why things broke. Why did systems collapse under pressure? Why did promising ideas fail once scale was introduced? Why did confidence matter more than competence? Until suddenly it didn't. I filled notebooks with questions no one had asked me, pages of diagrams that didn't mean anything yet, loose connections, half-formed structures. Most of it went nowhere, but something kept pulling me back. A flaw I'd noticed again and again, a weakness buried so deep in the process that people had accepted it as unavoidable, something everyone worked around instead of fixing. That's where the idea started. Not as a solution, but as a refusal. A refusal to accept that failure was just part of the process. I didn't tell Daniel at first. Not because I didn't trust him, at least not consciously, but because the idea felt fragile, like something that could evaporate if spoken out loud too soon. I wanted to be sure before I gave it a voice. So I worked in silence. During the day, I took whatever work I could find. At night, I disappeared into the idea. I stripped it down to its skeleton, then rebuilt it piece by piece. Every assumption was questioned, every shortcut rejected. If it broke, I wanted to know why. If it failed, I wanted it to fail honestly. Weeks blurred together, then months. There were nights when frustration pressed so hard against my chest I had to step outside just to breathe. Nights when I stared at my own work and wondered if I was chasing something that didn't exist. But then, slowly, something shifted. The pieces started fitting together. Not perfectly, not easily, but consistently. The idea stopped collapsing under its own weight. It held. That's when obsession set in. I stopped noticing time, stopped noticing hunger. Sometimes I'd realize the sun was rising and I hadn't moved in hours. My world narrowed until it was just a work in me, every variable accounted for, every failure documented. I wasn't building something impressive. I was building something durable. Daniel noticed a change before I said anything. "You've been quiet lately," he said one night, watching me scribble notes at the kitchen table. "Just thinking," I replied. He laughed. "You're always thinking." But his eyes lingered longer than usual. A few weeks later, I finally showed him. Not the whole thing, just enough. He leaned forward as I explained. Didn't interrupt. Didn't joke. Didn't pace. His usual energy drained away, replaced by something sharper. Focused. When I finished, the room went silent. He stared at the pages like they might disappear if he blinked. "This," he said slowly, "this is different." I nodded. "This actually fixes it." I nodded again. Daniel leaned back, exhaling through a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This changes everything." At the time, I thought he meant us. I thought he was proud. I didn't notice how his excitement felt less like celebration and more like recognition, like a man finally seeing the thing he'd been searching for. He started asking questions, lots of them, not about how it worked, but about how it would be received, who it was for, how it would be presented, who would hear about it first. "You need me for this," he said casually. "You know how to talk to people. You know how they think." He wasn't wrong. I'd built the engine. He knew how to sell the car. So I agreed. That was the moment the idea stopped being just mine and became something else. We started refining it together, or at least that's how it felt. I handled the structure, the logic, the foundations. Daniel worked on the pitch, the narrative, the story that made it sound inevitable instead of theoretical. He practiced constantly, out loud, in front of mirrors, on anyone who would listen. I watched him transform the idea into something more palatable, more exciting, more his. At first, it felt collaborative. Then I started noticing small things. How he talked about it when I wasn't in the room. How he used I instead of we without realizing it. How he answered questions meant for me before I could open my mouth. I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was just momentum, that success was finally close, and nerves were getting to both of us. But deep down, something unsettled me. The idea was still mine. Every system, every safeguard, every line. But the story around it was slowly changing. And stories, I was learning, were powerful things. They had a way of rewriting reality, especially when no one stopped them early. I didn't know it then, but this was the moment the line was crossed. Not dramatically, not violently, quietly. And quiet lines are the easiest ones to step over. At first, Daniel's pride looked harmless, encouraging, even. He talked about the idea like it was already alive, already moving through the world without us. He told friends we were on the edge of something big, said things like "this is finally it," with a confidence that felt contagious. I mistook momentum for unity. We started attending meetings together, informal conversations at first, coffee shop introductions, late-night phone calls with people who claimed they knew someone who might be interested. Daniel thrived in those spaces. He leaned forward when he spoke, made eye contact, laughed at the right moments. I stayed quiet unless I was asked something specific. That was the arrangement, whether we said it out loud or not. Daniel handled the story. I handled the substance. When questions came up that cut too close to the mechanics, scalability, pressure points, contingencies, he'd glance at me. I'd answer calmly, precisely, and watch relief wash over his face. It felt functional, balanced, until it didn't. The first shift was subtle enough that I almost missed it. Daniel stopped glancing at me. When deeper questions came, he started answering them himself. Not accurately, but confidently. He spoke in broad strokes, using language that sounded right without saying much at all. People nodded anyway. I corrected him once. Just a clarification. A small adjustment. Daniel smiled through it, but his jaw tightened. Later, as we walked back to the car, he laughed it off. "Don't undermine me in front of people," he said lightly. I told him I wasn't trying to. "I know," he replied. "Just trust me." Trust. The word landed heavier than it should have. From then on, his enthusiasm started to feel different. Possessive. He spoke about the idea the way people talk about things they're afraid of losing. Not protective, territorial. He became defensive when anyone questioned it, especially when those questions were technical. Instead of looping me in, he deflected. "They don't need to know all that," he'd say afterward. "It's too early for details. We don't want to confuse them." I knew the truth. He wasn't protecting the idea. He was protecting himself. Because understanding exposes gaps. And Daniel was building confidence on a foundation he didn't fully understand. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Our conversations grew shorter, more transactional. Daniel spent hours on calls in the other room, pacing like he used to during our broke years. Except now, the frustration had changed. Before, he was angry at the world. Now, he was afraid of losing control. I'd hear him repeat phrases over and over, refining his delivery, practicing stories that grew cleaner and simpler each time he told them. The idea became less about solving a problem and more about positioning, about optics, about ownership. I noticed how he talked about it when he thought I wasn't listening. My concept, my approach, my vision. I told myself it was semantics, but semantics shape reality. One night, after a long meeting that ended with vague promises and excited handshakes, Daniel poured himself a drink and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "They love it," he said. "They really do." "They love the story," I replied. He paused. "That's the same thing," he said. "It wasn't. But I let it go, because part of me still believed in the version of Daniel who'd clinked bottles with me years ago. The version who'd promised loyalty like it was sacred. I didn't want to see what was happening. I didn't want to admit that something was slipping. And Daniel could feel that. People always can. He started moving faster, scheduling meetings without telling me until the last minute, summarizing conversations instead of forwarding emails, framing decisions as already made. "I figured it was better this way," he'd say. "Less back and forth." I watched him rearrange the structure around himself, not maliciously, instinctively, like an animal securing territory. The worst part wasn't that he was drifting. It was that he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. In his mind, he wasn't stealing. He was stepping up. He began talking about pressure, how much weight was on his shoulders, how stressful it was to be the face of something this big. He talked about responsibility like it justified everything else. "I'm the one out there," he said one night. "If this fails, it's on me." I looked at him. "No," I said calmly. "If it fails because the system doesn't work." He laughed. "That's not how people see it." That sentence stayed with me, because it revealed something important. Daniel didn't care how things worked. He cared how they were perceived. From that point on, I stopped pushing back. Not because I agreed, because I understood. Daniel wasn't listening anymore. And arguing with someone who isn't listening only teaches them how to defend themselves better. So I adjusted. I answered questions only when asked. I documented everything. I saved versions. I tracked changes. Quietly, Daniel interpreted my silence as trust. All was surrender. His confidence grew louder, more visible. He began introducing himself differently. Founder, visionary, architect. Each word edged me further into the background. I watched him step fully into the spotlight, watched him enjoy it, and I realized something unsettling. Daniel didn't want partnership. He wanted authorship. And once someone believes a story belongs to them, they stop checking where it came from. The first lie didn't sound like a lie. That's the part people never tell you. It didn't come wrapped in malice or arrogance. It didn't arrive with a raised voice or dramatic declaration. It slipped into the room quietly, disguised as convenience. We were sitting across from two potential partners in a glass-walled conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air. Daniel was relaxed, confident in the way only someone who believes momentum is on their side can be. He leaned back in his chair, hands open, voice smooth. They asked a simple question. How did this idea come together? Daniel didn't look at me. He smiled and said, I realized there was a gap no one was addressing. Just that. No hesitation. No correction. No glance in my direction. The sentence landed softly, like it didn't matter. I waited. I expected him to follow it up, to add context, to say we, to acknowledge the nights I'd spent pulling the concept apart and rebuilding it piece by piece. He didn't. He kept talking. He spoke about frustration, about insight, about vision. He described a moment of clarity that never happened, a clean, polished origin story that sounded good and required no explanation. The room nodded along. I opened my mouth. Then I closed it, because correcting him in that moment would have shifted the tone. It would have made things awkward. It would have forced a conversation we weren't prepared to have in front of strangers. And Daniel knew that. That's what made it a lie. Not the words themselves, but the calculation behind them. After the meeting, we walked down the hallway together. Daniel was animated, energized, replaying the conversation out loud. Did you see their faces? He said. They're in. I stopped walking. You said it was your idea. I said. He blinked, then laughed. That's what you took from that. Yes. He shrugged. They don't need all the details. There it was, the justification. I stared at him, searching his face for something. Guilt, maybe, awareness, a crack. There was nothing, just certainty. We're a team, he continued. This stuff gets messy if we over-explain. Trust me. Trust. Again. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said, and that was the moment the lie settled into place. Because lies don't need agreement to survive. They just need silence. From that point on, the shift accelerated. Daniel started telling the origin story everywhere, refining it, sharpening it, removing anything that complicated his role. Each time, it grew more confident, more convincing, and further from the truth. He talked about late nights like they were his, described struggles he'd never endured, took ownership of decisions he'd never made. I became an afterthought. If I was mentioned at all, it was as support, technical help, execution, implementation. Not the architect, not the origin. I noticed how people interacted with me differently, how their questions shifted, how their attention stayed on Daniel even when I answered, how my presence felt optional. Daniel noticed too, and he liked it. He started scheduling meetings without telling me until the last minute, or sometimes, not at all. He'd summarize afterward, casually, like he was doing me a favor. Nothing major. He'd say, just groundwork. I asked once why I hadn't been included. He sighed, like I was being difficult. You don't like these things, he said. You said you preferred working behind the scenes. I hadn't, but I let it stand. Because pushing back now would require admitting what I'd been avoiding, that the brother I trusted had already decided where I belonged. Behind him, the lies multiplied, small ones at first, easy to dismiss individually, but together they formed a pattern. Daniel stopped asking for my input on decisions that directly affected the system. He framed changes as necessary, inevitable, already agreed upon. You're overthinking it, he said more than once. We'll adjust later. This is just how things are done. I watched him build confidence on borrowed ground, watched people respond to his certainty instead of the substance beneath it. And slowly, something inside me shifted. Not anger, awareness. I stopped correcting him, stopped filling in gaps, stopped rescuing him when questions got too close to the truth. Instead, I started listening. Closely, I noticed how often he contradicted himself, how his explanations shifted depending on the audience, how the story bent to fit the moment. He didn't realize it yet, but the lie was becoming heavy, and heavy things sink. The moment that confirmed everything came unexpectedly. An email chain, forwarded by mistake. Daniel had been introduced as the sole creator, sole founder, sole point of contact. My name wasn't mentioned once, not even as support. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed my laptop. That was the last time I felt unsure, because betrayal stops being painful once it becomes clear. Pain lives in confusion. Clarity is cold. I didn't confront him again. I didn't argue. I didn't demand recognition. I did something far more dangerous. I paid attention. I started saving everything. Drafts, versions, timestamp files, messages where he asked for help, notes where he admitted confusion. I watched the lies pile up faster than he could remember them, and I understood something Daniel didn't. You can lie about ownership. You can lie about effort. But you can't lie about understanding forever. Eventually, someone will ask a question that can't be answered with confidence alone. And when that moment comes, there's nowhere to hide. Daniel thought the lie was over. He thought he'd crossed the hardest part. He didn't realize the lie had only just begun, and that it was already pulling him under. I didn't find out from Daniel. I didn't hear it in a meeting or through a careful conversation meant to soften the blow. I saw it online, a photo of him shaking hands, a headline that called him a visionary, a short paragraph describing a breakthrough I recognized instantly because it was mine. My name wasn't there, not in the caption, not in the article, not even buried at the bottom in small print. I refreshed the page like it might change. It didn't. Years of work, reduced to a smile that wasn't mine. I remember sitting very still, staring at the screen until my eyes started to hurt. My hand shook, but not from anger, from something colder, a quiet understanding settling into place. Daniel hadn't forgotten me. He had erased me. The messages started coming in soon after. People congratulating him. People asking how long he'd been working on his idea. I watched his responses pop up on my phone. Confident, polished, complete. He didn't hesitate. That was what hurt the most. I confronted him once. Privately. Calmly. He didn't deny it. He reframed it. This is just how it works, he said. You're not the face. I am. I looked at him and realized something irreversible had already happened. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. So I stopped arguing. I stopped reacting. I stopped trying to reclaim what he had already taken. Instead, I stepped back. I let him move faster. Let him take more credit. Let him make decisions without me. And while he built confidence, I built records. Every original file. Every early draft. Every message where he asked questions he now pretended he understood. I didn't rush, because erasure cuts both ways. If you remove someone from the story, you also remove the only person who can quietly save you when things go wrong. Daniel didn't see that yet. He was too busy enjoying the spotlight, too busy believing the hardest part was over. But the truth is a way of resurfacing when pressure is applied. And pressure was coming. I didn't confront Daniel again. Not directly. Not loudly. Not in the way people think of when they imagine revenge. I stopped asking questions. Stopped attending meetings unless absolutely necessary. Stopped offering input he didn't want, which was almost always. I became invisible. Not out of fear. Not because I had nothing to offer. But because people like Daniel don't fear confrontation. They fear exposure. And I had learned how to wait. I documented everything. Every file. Every version. Every message that proved which ideas were mine. Every step he had taken without understanding the foundation beneath him. I let him believe he was running the show. Let him believe he had won. Let him enjoy the applause. It was fascinating to watch. The more Daniel thrived in the spotlight, the more careless he became. The more confident he appeared, the more gaps he left unguarded. The more he spoke as the architect of my work, the more mistakes he made that only someone with a full picture could see. And I had the full picture. I didn't rush the moment. I didn't need immediate satisfaction. Patience is more powerful than rage, more effective than anger, more devastating than confrontation. I waited. I watched. I let him build the illusion of control, because illusions always crumble. And when his confidence began to falter, when questions he couldn't answer stacked up faster than lies could hold, I would be ready, not to attack, not to humiliate, but to ensure the truth, finally, could no longer be denied. I had the evidence, the timing, the clarity. All I needed was the right moment. And Daniel, blissfully unaware, continued performing for an audience that didn't know what they were applauding. He thought he had erased me completely. He didn't realize that sometimes the most powerful revenge is not immediate. It's not loud. It's silent. It waits. And it strikes when the other person is already teetering on the edge. I didn't interfere. Not anymore. I let Daniel believe he had the world in his hands. He strutted through meetings, smiled for cameras, nodded in interviews. The applause followed him everywhere, as though the universe itself confirmed he had earned it. But confidence built on borrowed foundation is fragile. I watched him make decisions he didn't understand. I watched him misread situations I had anticipated for months. I watched his so-called genius unravel in slow, subtle ways that the world around him couldn't yet see. At first, it was almost imperceptible. Small mistakes, slight miscalculations, misinterpreted signals, a contract misunderstood, a question answered incorrectly, a promise he had no idea how to fulfill. Each misstep alone would have been insignificant, but accumulated, unnoticed, they form cracks. And cracks grow. Investors grew uneasy. Partners started asking questions that required knowledge only I had. Daniel answered them with charm and conviction, yet he didn't have the depth to back it up. Confidence cannot replace understanding. Not forever. I watched his arrogance slowly turn into panic. Each time someone questioned a detail, he smiled too brightly, laughed too loud, spoke too fast. The mask he had worn so easily began to slip. The man who had once stood tall in the spotlight, claiming authorship over everything, began to tremble quietly under its weight. And the most beautiful part? I felt nothing. No triumph. No anger. No joy. Because the satisfaction wasn't in witnessing his failure. It was in knowing it was inevitable. It was in knowing that every step he took, every word he spoke, every decision he made, was setting him up for the collapse I had patiently orchestrated through observation and silence. I kept careful notes, tracked his errors, kept the original safe. Every file, every draft, every timestamp, proof that the foundations of his success had never belonged to him. He never noticed me slipping further into the background. He never noticed the quiet patience that had replaced my earlier anger. And that was a final cruelty, because Daniel had been arrogant enough to believe that erasing me erased the consequences, that removing my presence erased accountability, that silencing my voice erased truth. But truth doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back. By the time the first real cracks appeared publicly, I was ready. I had nothing to prove, yet everything to reveal. And Daniel, the man who had once stolen my work and my name without remorse, finally discovered that confidence without comprehension is nothing but a thin veil. A veil that, under pressure, always tears. I didn't intervene. I didn't help. I didn't need to. I just watched, as he flailed, as he panicked, as the empire he had claimed for himself slowly slipped from his hands. And I felt nothing, because revenge, when executed quietly, doesn't need celebration. It doesn't demand witnesses. It just arrives, and it always finds its mark. It came late at night, a call I didn't expect, the kind of call that arrives quietly, over a line crackling with static and distance, but carries more weight than any confrontation could. The voice on the other end was smaller than I remembered, softer, worn. The arrogance that had once made him untouchable was gone. "Can you explain this?" he asked. His words were careful, deliberate, almost pleading. I listened. I let him stumble through the details, flounder in explanations that were clumsy and incomplete. Every sentence, every hesitation, confirmed what I already knew. He had been building on borrowed ground for too long. The foundation he had tried to claim as his own was cracking beneath him, and he was finally realizing it. You need to fix this, he said, almost whispering, as though saying it aloud made it real. I didn't reply immediately, because I didn't need to, because truth doesn't scream. Truth waits. I let the silence stretch, long enough for him to feel it, long enough for him to understand that he had miscalculated, long enough for panic to settle in behind the confidence he had worn like armor for so many months. When I finally spoke, it was calm, measured, controlled. I can help, I said, and I meant it, not in the way he expected, though, not as a crutch, not as forgiveness. I meant it as clarity, because the only thing worse than failure is failure that's hidden under lies. He stumbled again. Words faltered. The carefully rehearsed story he had perfected for months was dissolving into chaos. You don't understand, he said. I did everything. I know, I replied. And there it was, the worst part for him. I knew everything, every step he had taken, every lie he had laid over the truth, every misstep that would now be exposed because he had forgotten how fragile performance is without substance. His breathing quickened. I could hear it through the line. The confidence he had cultivated so meticulously was cracking in real time, and I still didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I didn't punish, because he was already collapsing under his own construction. The call ended quietly. No threats, no recriminations, just an understanding that everything he had built was unraveling. And as I hung up, I realized something I had always known but never needed to test. The most dangerous revenge doesn't come from confrontation. It doesn't demand fire, fury, or witnesses. It comes from patience, from silence, from knowing the truth while letting someone else live a lie long enough for it to destroy them. And Daniel, the man who had stolen my work and my name, had done it all himself. I didn't need to interfere. I just waited. And now, finally, the reckoning had begun. The phone rang late that night. I almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But something in the pause before I picked up told me it was him. Daniel. When his voice came through, it was smaller than I had ever heard it, less assured, almost fragile. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. The lie in that sentence wasn't about what he had done. It was about what he thought he could control. The arrogance of assuming he could manipulate reality without consequence. I let him ramble. Let him explain, justify, plead. I listened as a man who had stolen my work, my time, my effort, the man who had erased my presence, finally stumbled under the weight of his own hubris. When he paused to catch his breath, I spoke, calmly, slowly. I forgive you, I said. The words landed like a hammer. Not mercy, not weakness, not relief. Closure. Because forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the need to fight every battle, to claim every victory, to justify your own existence to someone who never cared to understand it. Daniel didn't respond immediately. I imagined him grasping for words that wouldn't exist, words that could no longer alter the path he had taken. And then I hung up. I never answered again. I didn't need to. The empire he had tried to claim as his own collapsed quietly, efficiently, and entirely on its own. I had given him the space to fail, the opportunity to expose himself, the chance to suffocate under the weight of the truth he had ignored for too long. He had learned, the hard way, that confidence built on theft is always temporary, that lies, no matter how polished, eventually unravel, that people who think they can erase others often only erase themselves in the process. And I learned, too, that the most dangerous betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you trusted most, from the ones who knew your dreams, your weaknesses, and your ambitions. If you've ever been betrayed, remember this. Don't rush revenge. Don't demand immediate justice. Don't let anger make you predictable. Sometimes, the greatest power is patience, the quiet observation, the knowing that the truth has its own weight, and it always balances eventually. Daniel thought he had stolen everything from me. He didn't understand that some things aren't stolen. They are preserved, they are protected, and they are returned in their own time. So I walked away, silently, coldly, knowing the lesson had been learned, and that some people don't fall from grace. They suffocate inside it,